A drama worthy of Shakespeare's pen is unfolding on the world stage, yet it remains in the shadows of news headlines. Washington's unexpected tariff strike on Swiss goods has triggered a chain reaction, threatening to redraw the map of the global economy. As the old world and the new world sort out their relationship, the East is ready to welcome those who have turned away. Switzerland, the land of banks and impeccable watches, finds itself at a crossroads. In response to the 31% tariff imposed by the United States, the Alpine Republic is showing a willingness to sever economic ties with its overseas partner. Not only the famous Swiss chocolate and watches, but also vital medicines are in danger of disappearing from American shelves. While the Swiss president was trying to resolve the conflict in Washington, the country's foreign minister was already concluding agreements in Beijing. This move is not just a diplomatic maneuver, but a clear signal of a shift in priorities. Switzerland, long considered a staunch ally of the United States, is now seeking new horizons in cooperation with China. And Switzerland is not alone in its pursuit of an economic turnaround. More and more countries are emerging from under America's influence, attracted by the prospects of lower tariffs and the growing influence of trade alliances forming around China. Trade policies pursued under the slogans of protecting national interests may result in the loss of key partners and the weakening of global influence for the United States. The consequences of this confrontation remain to be assessed, but it is already clear that the world is on the threshold of a new economic era. The disruption of logistics chains, bankruptcies of companies, and the transfer of advanced technologies, particularly in the field of artificial intelligence, into the hands of China are just some of the consequences of global changes. Let's try to understand what this tectonic shift means not only for Switzerland and China, but for the entire global economy. Washington's new strategy is called strategic uncertainty, and it sounds as alarming as it feels in reality. The United States seems to have stopped adhering to generally accepted rules, preferring to keep everyone in a state of constant tension. Under the previous administration, America increasingly resembled an economic pendulum, threatening, punishing, or encouraging, and then suddenly changing course. Such tactics bear little resemblance to diplomacy. Rather, it is economic blackmail wrapped in the chaos of unpredictability. Switzerland, it seems, has grown tired of such instability and has begun to seek reliable support in China. At first glance, this may seem surprising, but the details explain a lot. The recent visit of Swiss Foreign Minister Ignazio Cassis to Beijing was the first visit of such a high level since 2019. The summit was not a mere formality, behind the scenes of which a potential shift in the global balance of power was brewing. While American media were awash with headlines about trade wars, technological restrictions, and the election race, China was methodically doing what it does best, concluding strategic deals. During the visit, the parties agreed to resume strategic dialogue and update the trade agreement in force since 2014. While Washington threatens its partners with economic sanctions, Beijing offers trade expansion, access to resources, and deeper cooperation. This is not just about beautiful gestures. Switzerland and China have agreed to strengthen ties in finance, science, green energy, education, and even winter sports. The year 2025 has been declared the year of culture and tourism. In anticipation of this, China has canceled visas for Swiss citizens, and Switzerland has promised to simplify entry for Chinese tourists and entrepreneurs. And especially telling, while Cassis was in Beijing talking about rapprochement, the Swiss pharmaceutical company Roche announced investments of $50 billion. It is likely that the Swiss president's visit to China was intended to mitigate the effects of the tariff confrontation with the United States or to demonstrate disagreement with the White House's policies. The contrast between the actions of the two world powers is striking. Beijing offers partnership and cooperation, while Washington resorts to economic pressure. It is worth considering when was the last time a U.S. ally, subjected to sanctions, so openly demonstrated interest in cooperation with China? This is certainly worrying. Switzerland is not just one of the European countries. It is an influential player in the global economy, a leader in pharmaceuticals, banking, and the production of high-precision equipment. Traditionally adhering to neutrality in geopolitical disputes, it is now establishing ties with China, which may indicate a loss of confidence in the United States as a reliable partner on the part of neutral states. It's noteworthy that both sides reaffirmed their commitment to the United Nations and the principles of international law, the very principles that the United States previously championed but has increasingly disregarded in favor of tariffs and unilateral decisions. China, in contrast, demonstrates strategic thinking focused on the long term. While America escalates trade disputes and alienates allies, Beijing chooses a different path: patience, mutually beneficial agreements, and soft power. The Swiss maneuver may not be an isolated incident, but a harbinger of the decline of the post-war economic architecture. Amid the erosion of global trust, neutral states are seeking new avenues for development. If even Switzerland is exercising caution, who will follow suit? Certainly, not all countries will change course immediately, as many still rely on American security guarantees and the financial system. However, the process appears to be underway. It's significant that this shift didn't begin with Trump. Even under Biden, America started retreating from globalization, supporting domestic production and restricting China's access to key technologies. Trump, however, wielding a sledgehammer, began dismantling the system. Tariffs returned with renewed force, not only to protect American jobs, but also as a tool to pressure other countries. And here's the irony. Trump constantly claims that the U.S. is being exploited, yet World Bank data suggests otherwise. China's average tariff is only 3%, far from the 67% expected by Trump. The situation with trade tariffs between the U.S. and China raises a legitimate question about the fairness of accusations of foul play. Even with a possible suspension of new tariffs, the key interest rate in the U.S. remains at 10%, significantly higher than the equivalent rate in China. The Trump administration actively proclaims the conclusion of over 200 trade agreements. However, behind this impressive number lies a reality. Most of these agreements are minor arrangements, often part of dubious negotiations. The lack of a clear strategy and plan leads to chaotic economic diplomacy, dominated by populist pronouncements and unpredictable actions. Ultimately, ordinary Americans pay the price for this policy. Prices for everyday goods have risen by an average of 20%. Tariffs of up to 245% have been imposed on some Chinese goods, significantly increasing the cost of electronics, appliances, toys, and clothing. As a result, consumers are forced to economize, and even affluent shoppers have become more cautious in their spending. Importers, anticipating impending problems, began actively purchasing goods earlier in the year to beat the introduction of new tariffs. Currently, their warehouses are overflowing, leading to a sharp decline in new orders. Economic forecasts are alarming. Import volumes risk plummeting by 3/4 in just 1 quarter. The blow is not only to foreign exporters, but also to American businesses. Factories, retail chains, logistics companies, and the entire established supply system are under threat. Famous Swiss watches, precision German parts, high-tech Korean electronics. All these goods are becoming prohibitively expensive for the American consumer. Enterprises critically dependent on imported components are forced to reduce production or pass on the increased costs to consumers. Inflation, like a shadow, is once again looming over the economy, choosing the most inopportune moment to strike. But what is particularly paradoxical is that American manufacturers, for whose support the protectionist measures were supposedly introduced, are themselves in a difficult position. Automotive companies, technology giants, pharmaceutical companies, all still require imported components. Now they face supply delays, rising costs, and, consequently, reduced profitability. The slogan, "Made in America," certainly sounds patriotic, but the reality is that production within the country is more expensive, takes longer, and in some cases is simply impossible without the participation of foreign suppliers. However, perhaps the most painful blow is not inflation, but the loss of trust. This capital is not restored overnight. For decades, the United States served as a benchmark of stability and fair trade, a reliable partner in the global economic system. The previously unshakable image of a world order where the United States occupied a central place is now showing significant cracks. States once oriented towards Washington are increasingly turning their gaze in search of new allies and partners. India is strengthening economic and political ties with Russia, and Brazil is demonstrating impressive growth in trade with China. Against the backdrop of these changes, the BRICS alliance is gaining strength, challenging traditional centers of influence. Even in Europe, there is a trend towards separation, expressed in the erection of trade barriers and the defense of its own economic interests. As a result of these processes, a new reality is forming, a world in which trust is becoming a scarce resource, and alliances that seemed unbreakable are falling apart in the blink of an eye. Globalization, which seemed like an irreversible process, has not only slowed down, but is also showing signs of collapse. And in this dramatic transformation, the United States is not acting as an outside observer, but as an active participant whose policies may inadvertently push the world system to collapse. Of course, many Americans feel deprived and forgotten as a result of decades of free trade policies. The desire to protect domestic industries and create new jobs is quite understandable. However, the question is how to achieve these goals without alienating allies and undermining the foundations of the global economic order. Perhaps, in the short term, America will achieve tactical victories. New factories will open, and the trade deficit will decrease slightly. But in the long term, the price for such protectionism may be prohibitively high. Rising prices, the destruction of established ties with allies, and chaos in the global economy, where there are no generally accepted rules and uncertainty reigns, are just some of the possible negative consequences. In the current situation, the prospects for returning to the previous state of affairs seem illusory. While Washington exchanges menacing statements and resorts to punitive measures in trade, Beijing is choosing a different strategy. It does not raise its voice, but subtly closes doors. Coldly and calculatingly, China is restricting access to its colossal consumer economy, estimated at $17 trillion. And American companies are already feeling the chilling breath of these changes. At the same time, few people pay attention to a key aspect. The main part of the income of American corporations in China is formed not due to exports, but due to activities in the domestic market. Giants such as Apple, Starbucks, McDonald's, and General Motors make profits not from containers leaving the port of Long Beach, but from shopping centers in Beijing and other cities of the Celestial Empire. The income of American firms from operations within China is 6 times higher than the income from exports from the United States. Now imagine that this powerful source of profit is beginning to dry up. China is in no hurry to introduce direct bans, preferring to act more subtly. Processes are delayed, rules are complicated, an atmosphere of soft pressure is created, pushing consumers to purchase Chinese products. Formally, everything happens within the framework of the law, but the effect is very noticeable. The profits of American corporations are falling, stock quotes are falling, and real panic reigns in the boardrooms. While some American corporations are taking steps to diversify, reorienting themselves to the dynamically developing markets of Southeast Asia and India in order to reduce their dependence on the Chinese economy, this process is far from complete. And here an unexpected twist appears on the horizon. Today, China seems to be able to afford an economic separation from the West. If in 2018 Chinese consumers had practically no alternative to Western brands, then by 2025 the situation had changed radically, and a wide selection of domestic goods opened up before them. Giants such as Xiaomi and Huawei are successfully displacing Apple from the market, and local coffee chains, such as Luckin Coffee, are becoming serious competitors to Starbucks. As for Tesla, Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers offer similar models at prices that are half as low. This blow could be very painful for the American auto giant. Every American brand that is hinted at leaving is promptly replaced by a Chinese analog. This trade confrontation affects not only the sphere of fast food and smartphones, but also penetrates into the very heart of modern technologies, into the microchip industry, the very ones that control everything from mobile phones to complex anti-missile systems. The United States strategy was extremely tough: to cut off China's access to advanced chips, restrict the supply of processors from NVIDIA, and thereby slow down Beijing's military and technological ambitions. The technological blockade, it would seem, puts checkmate, but China is not going to give up. Huawei responds to the challenge by releasing a Cent 910D, its own chip, which may be inferior to NVIDIA H1, but is quite suitable for the needs of the market. The company plans to release 800,000 of these chips this year. The strategy prevails due to scale, focusing on the countries of the global south, where quantity is often more important than advanced quality. While Washington focuses on technological superiority, China is seizing the niche of supplier, targeting Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, regions often overlooked by the West. These countries don't need the most advanced chips. They need affordable, reliable, and functional solutions, which China is ready to provide. When entire continents build their infrastructure on Chinese chips, they acquire not just equipment, but also a certain dependency. China, in turn, gains not only financial benefits, but also influence, acquiring new allies and shaping its own digital empire. However, Beijing's technological giant still has an Achilles heel: advanced microchip manufacturing. Designing a chip is a feasible task, but establishing its mass production at the 5-nanometer level and below is a completely different art. This requires unique machines from the Dutch company ASML, unavailable to China due to pressure from the United States. In these conditions, Beijing is forced to be content with the available opportunities, but this does not mean stagnation. Behind the scenes, large-scale work is unfolding, with billions of dollars being invested in research, development, and equipment procurement. Companies such as Huawei and SMIC are relentlessly racing to create their own lithographic machines. The state provides comprehensive support, offering subsidies, preferential loans, and demonstrating political will. And the results are already visible. China has successfully mastered the production of 7-nanometer chips, and according to some reports, prototypes of 5-nanometer chips are already being tested in laboratories. If China manages to overcome this technological barrier and establish the production of advanced chips without Western dependence, it will be a turning point in the global technological race. But for now, this remains only a probability. Producing chips of this level requires the highest precision, years of experience, and broad international cooperation. When China achieves full technological independence, it will be a moment of truth for America, depriving it of its main lever of influence. Export barriers will prove powerless, and attempts at technological blockade will be futile. China will transform into a self-sufficient force in the most advanced industry of the 21st century. It is time to realize the harsh reality. American corporations risk losing 1.5 billion consumers overnight. China may face temporary difficulties in accessing some Western developments, but it will open doors to the rest of the world, especially to developing markets. And then other countries will have to make a choice, and many may prefer Beijing. While loud statements about a tough line against China are heard in Washington's political circles, they may be overlooking the main danger. American business is already losing ground, while the Chinese chip industry is gaining momentum, and the U.S. control over technological leadership is slipping away. A disturbing question arises. If Washington has already used all its trump cards, what does it have in reserve for the next move? The global economy is a constantly changing organism. Transformations do not happen overnight, but gradually, day by day, they shape a new reality. To stay abreast of these tectonic shifts and not miss important trends, it is worth regularly consulting trusted sources of information and analysis.